with this Prelude and Fugue in C major, we are moving on to Book 2, which means that we are halfway through this project. Now, there is speculation and no conclusive evidence as to why Bach decided to do a second book of Well Tempered Clavier. To answer this question, or even to give a tentative answer, one needs to understand that what we regard today as Book 1 and Book 2 is a bit different from what it was in Bach's mind. We would be wrong to assume that this is a collection of work written specifically for the purpose of being the second book of the Well Tempered Clavier, as we would have been wrong to assume this about the first book. Both of them were written primarily for Bach as teaching material, and it is thought that a simple reason for Book 2 is that after 15 years or so, Bach wanted to renew a little bit the material he was drawing on for his students. It also seems to indicate that he was teaching slightly more advanced students, because indeed Book 2 couldn't be played by amateurs. The level of complexity is much increased from Book 1. And that tie with the second piece of argumentation. Bach already in his time, and for a considerable time in fact after his death, was regarded as rather passé, a master writing in a style that was no longer relevant in his time. And the evidence is that he was quite upset about that. And in fact, it could be argued that he wrote Book 2 in order to show that he was still in the game. The second book is written really in a collection of style from the Stile Antico that was 200 years old, up to the latest development of the Stile Galant. So it covers a wide range stylistically. Now, to come to the Prelude, nothing could highlight better the difference of style between Book 1 and Book 2 than the two preludes which open each cycle. Book 1 you will remember as one of the most famous but also one of the most intimate, delicate piece of music. Now Book 2 enters by the great door. And that symbolizes very well the difference of conception between the two books. Book 2 is on a much grander scale. If you want, less intimate, more complex altogether. This prelude has the interesting peculiarity of being written most probably for the harpsichord, but in order to evoke the style of the organ, which means that when you play it on the piano, you play on the piano a piece written for the harpsichord destined to evoke the sound of the organ. So you are going through all the keyboards. But actually the piano is not bad at all at doing that. So it's a piece which is full of imitation of a very rich and dense texture, and where all the parts keep copying each other all the time. There is one danger, which is a certain monotony, because the texture is absolutely the same over 3 pages without a single break. And that on the piano can be alleviated with careful and very subtle gradation of dynamics, which have to remain quite subtle, because anything that you do that would be too obvious would feel completely out of style and just wouldn't sound good. So it's interesting because the prelude is indeed quite complex, but the fugue is on a contrapuntal level quite simple. So in some ways you could say it is exactly the opposite from the first set of Book 1, where the fugue was a contrapuntal monster and the prelude was extremely simple. The subject of the fugue in two very clear parts, and so on. And what I like very much about this particular fugue is that the two parts of the subject can be made to sound quite different with the long note values. And then the long stream of semiquaver, sometimes which runs like. So in my interpretation, and that's a pianistic thing, and on the whole we will see that Book 2 offers more scope for creativity in the interpretation than Book 1. The creativity in Book 1 is very often limited by your choice of tempi, which is very important, and then your choice of articulation. But once you have set the parameters, very often you have to let it run its course. Book 2 engages you more as an interpreter, as a creative interpreter. That's certainly true when you play it on the piano. I can't talk as a harpsichord player because I have no experience, but you feel more an interpreter when you play Book 2. And in fact, there are more problems, and I'll discuss this as I go. There are more pieces where I don't really know where to go, or I can see very different solutions, or I can propose things that seem to me very daring, but nevertheless can work. Anyway, in this fugue, what I do is I take out the trumpet for the first part, and then I do something much more scurrying and delicate for. So I contrast the two parts of the subject, and that works very well when they eventually mix. So in this fugue you will see that you have this constant tapestry, this background of semiquavers hurrying away somewhere in the distance, and on this background you have things which happen, which are very often based on, and it can take various forms, like but most of them you recognize some form of the main head of the subject of the fugue. So it is an amusing fugue. It's not a polyphonic masterpiece. It belongs to the light-hearted and delightful ones. A very good opening for the Book 2.